Today I'll be cutting and assembling a 12-segment ring using the new segment cutting sled that I recently built. Also, we're going to be using the rope clamp that I made the other day as well. To cut a 12-segment ring, I need to set the cutting angles at 30 degrees. Since the angle aluminum is square and true, I can use a digital protractor to set my angles. I have already cut a practice ring and have found that the cuts were perfect. To make sure the length of each segment is exactly the same, I took two pieces of wood and fastened them together, and then attached this to the rip fence of the table saw. Be sure the arm of the spacer bar is not touching the top of the sled. I still design my items using inches, but when I measure the length of the wedges, I have found using centimeters and millimeters to be much easier. From trial and error, I have found that the outside cutting edge of the saw blade to be 3.5 millimeters from the inside cut on the sled. I simply add 3.5 millimeters to the length of the segment and measure from the inside cutting edge of the sled to the edge of the spacer bar. You need to be very meticulous and make sure this length is very accurate. It seems I cut off the area where I was marking the blue segment or the blue edge on the board. I simply mark that and then I lay it down and then mark another green edge or green mark along the other edge of the board. You'll need these later when assembling the rings. I place the end of the wood up next to the saw blade and raise the saw blade so that the top edge of the wood is about halfway up the gullet on the saw blade. I usually start cutting the wood on the side of the board closest to me. After cutting the first angle in the end of the wood, keep the same side of the wood on the table and move it to the other side of the cutting guide. Slide the wood to the edge of the spacer bar and make another cut. Using the eraser end of the pencil, I slide the wedge aside. I've designed the sled so when I pull the sled forward, the majority of the saw blade is covered. At this point, I remove the spacer guide from the rip fence and lower the saw blade. I remove the sled and replace it with another sheet of melamine covered particle board that I use when I'm gluing things together. Using a sharp 4-inch scraper, I clean off the dry glue from the surface of my workspace. I get ready for the glue up by pouring some yellow glue on a chunk of coriander. Then try to get all my ducks in a row by setting out the rest of the items I'm going to use. A month or so ago, my wife and I went to a business expo here in Lubbock. While there, we picked up several dozen of these disposable nail files. I found out they do a tremendous job of cleaning the fuzzies off of the segments. After getting the edges cleaned, I begin assembly of the ring by placing the segments with the green side up, and then I alternate the segments with the point that has the blue ink on them with the point that does not have any ink on them. To help keep everything in order, I place a strip of tape on the table with the sticky side up. You really don't need to use gloves while using yellow glue. It just peels off pretty easily. But after 48 years in the medical field, I got used to wearing them all the time anyway. To begin the glue up, I stand each segment on edge so I can see that they are really alternated. It was 103 out when I made this video, so the glue sort of skinned over while I was waiting. I used an old popsicle stick to spread the glue on each segment and place each one on the edge of the tape. Be sure you align all of the segments on the tape with facing the same direction. Be sure to make sure that each of the segments are alternated with the blue and without any ink on them. I double check to make sure the segments are all alternated. I then lay the row of segments with the ink facing up to make sure I have them facing correctly. Now wrap the tape around the ring to make them snug. Be sure that they are all aligned correctly. Using the end of a mallet, I pound on each side to make sure the ring is flat. Place the rope clamp over the edge of the ring and pull it snug. Place a dowel between the two ends of the rope next to the handle and tie it in a square knot. I now pull everything to the edge of the workpiece and start cranking on the dowel. The groove in the end of the handle will help it from coming unraveled. The parachute cord is around 750-pound test, so it is highly unlikely you will break the cord. I use the mallet to pound everything flat on both sides and crank on the parachute cord a few more times just to make sure everything's good and tight. I've yet to have anything ever come apart. I now set everything aside to cure overnight or several days until I get the rest of the rings finished.